What's up, friends, and welcome into Fantasy Pros, the fantasy football podcast. It's week 1 ranking time. That's right. No more draft. It's time to get these guys in action, and we're doing it. I'm Chris Welsh. We got Pat Fitzmaurice and Mick Ciallela, both breaking down week 1 rankings. We're doing quarterback, we're doing running back, wide receiver, tight end. We're looking at ECR and where these guys are differing and arguing, and we're just getting down to brass tacks. Doing it all, and I'm excited to get to it, and thank you guys for hanging out with us. We finally got here. Pat, can you believe it? Months and months of all of this prep, all the pre-draft rankings, and now we're just ranking for week 1. And I'll tell you, I was working on my rankings last night, and when you start to make those adjustments that are off of draft rankings, it actually is a little alarming. When, you've had these same guys, this is your RB6 and this is your RB12 and your wide receiver 14. And then all of a sudden this week, you're like, well, this guy's a really bad matchup. And you go completely different off of the draft rankings. It's a little disarming, I suppose, going into this first week.
It is. The shift from draft season to in season is always so abrupt and jarring. I'm sure a lot of people are feeling that right now, and having this draft plan, and now all of a sudden they've got to make their starting lineups, and a lot of this is not as cut and dried as it seemed back in July when we were putting these teams together.
Mick, did you feel at all in putting these together, did you feel disjointed? Was there anybody, like even a specific player as you were going through your ranks that you had been so locked into in the draft season, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, they're going way down? What was the process in putting the ranks together?
Yeah, it's interesting because we don't have any data to go off of. We have last season's, matchups and things like that, but we don't know how much of that is going to be applicable for this season. So there were a couple of people, I know we're going to discuss some running backs, but I think Derrick Henry was one in particular that I dropped a little bit further this week in comparison to my season-long rankings. So yeah, there were definitely a few adjustments that had to be made based on week 1 matchups.
Well, we got it all. You guys can check it over at fantasypros.com/rankings, week 1 rankings from all of the experts. The contest is underway, and we are going to get right into it in this episode. But speaking of contests, we got one for you. We got one coming, and we're going to announce a winner. So we're officially announcing the winner of the Joe Burrow signed helmet. The winner of said Joe Burrow helmet giveaway is Jared Smith. We'll be contacting you to get to you that prize, so stay tuned and on the lookout. Congratulations on winning Jared Smith this awesome Joe Burrow helmet. And guess what? We're not done, because we're going right back to it. If you want a chance to win a signed Devonta Smith Eagles helmet for free, courtesy of our friends at pristineauction.com. All you've got to do is head over to fantasypros.com/contest. Complete the form and either download the Fantasy Pros My Playbook app, leave a review for the podcast, or follow us on X, Instagram, or TikTok at Fantasy Pros. The more actions you complete, the more entries you're going to receive. We'll be announcing a winner right here on the podcast, just like we did with Joe Burrow. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and claim your prize. Gentlemen, let's strap in. Let's get to the ranks. It's time for quarterback ranks. And first up, we are going to go through the ECR before we get to a couple of your guys' rank discrepancies or differences here. So far, as we're recording this, the ECR looks Josh Allen is the number 1 quarterback, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, pretty chalk for the top 4. Anthony Richardson at 5, CJ Stroud at 6, Kyler Murray at 7, Joe Burrow at 8, Jordan Love at 9, Jaden Daniels at 10, Jared Goff, and Tua. That rounds out the top 12. One difference we do see is Trevor Lawrence. Mick, you got him at quarterback 11. Pat's got him at quarterback 12. The consensus is quarterback 13. So this is a quarterback that you both have as a QB1 that did not show in the consensus. So Pat, what put you to this spot? You barely have him there. Mick is a little bit of the higher guy on him, but let's start with you. I don't know which quarterback of that top 12 got knocked out for you. Was it maybe Trevor Lawrence for Tua? Talk to us about Lawrence.
Yeah, it was Trevor Lawrence for Tua, and I have those two adjacent in my rankings, but I'm a little concerned about what the Miami defense is going to look like this year. I mean, they lost Vic Fangio, their coordinator. They lost Christian Wilkins. They lost Andrew Van Ginkel, who is a terrific pass rusher. So they have endured some pretty tough personnel losses, and the loss of their commander this offseason. So I'm not sure. Like, I have had a Dolphins fan who wrote me a nice note explaining why he thought maybe the defense wasn't going to lose anything. But, I guess we're going to find out soon enough. I'm not sure about this Miami defense. I think this week 1 game could be a shootout. So I'm pretty enthusiastic about starting Trevor Lawrence, or at least, Lawrence was this guy who was going like quarterback 15, quarterback 16 in drafts. So a guy who's kind of a borderline start-sit QB for week 1, and I'd feel pretty good about starting him if I had to.
Mick, the same thing here. I mean, you've got him 1 notch higher. You've got him at 11, so you're inside of that top 12. I'd be curious, in probably the same respect, I'm guessing the shootout side is what you're leaning onto, but also who are the quarterbacks that jumped or were pushed down for Trevor Lawrence?
My main quarterback that I pushed down was Jaden Daniels. I also have Kyler Murray underneath Trevor Lawrence. I still have him as my QB12, but I do have Lawrence rated higher than those guys. And a lot of it is, based on what Pat said, the matchup. Should be a shootout. I think we got the second highest implied Vegas total in this game between Jacksonville and Miami. Jacksonville's going to have to put up points to keep up with Miami. And I think the way to do that is throwing the ball. And as Pat alluded to, the losses on defensive personnel and coaching staff, I think is going to lead to a little bit more volume than normal out of Lawrence.
And I mean, there's always going to be a big shootout respect. And I think what's interesting about this is if, both these guys have Trevor Lawrence up, it's something to look for some of the receiving options and paying attention to where those ranks are going to go. Brian Thomas being a specific player. Christian Kirk, I feel like people are kind of in and out about. We had another notable difference that comes outside of the top 12 that was in your ranks. And it was Matthew Stafford. And this is another one of those guys kind of in that Trevor Lawrence territory that was sitting, somewhere between like 15 and 18 and how people were valuing him. This week, he's got an ECR 16. So we're outside of that top 12. Fitz, you've got him at 19 and Mick's got him at 16. So Mick's got him at consensus. You are out on Matthew Stafford. You think the Pittsburgh defense is just going to be bull rushing and we're not going to see that big passing game that everyone's expecting with Cousins?
Detroit. So they got the Lions. And
did I say Pittsburgh? Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. So the Lions, like they have spent the offseason focusing on improving their defensive backfield. They drafted Alabama star cornerback Terrion Arnold. They signed longtime Buccaneers cornerback Carlton Davis. So this Lions pass defense should be a little better. Also, Rams left tackle Alaric Jackson is suspended for the first 2 games of the season for violating the league's personal conduct policy. His replacement is Joe Notaboom, who was graded 69th last season by PFF out of the 81 tackles they graded. So protection is going to be a little bit of a concern, I think, for Matthew Stafford here. And this Detroit pass defense might not be quite as susceptible as it was in 2023.
I turned Matthew Stafford into Kirk Cousins in my head, who, by the way, scarily is one of my highest shares. When we were doing our high shares, I have Jalen Hurts and Kirk Cousins heavily invested. So as soon as I looked at that, I went to Kirk Cousins. But yes, Matthew Stafford in there. Mick, you have him at ECR. Is there any excitement around Matthew Stafford this week, even though you've got him on average?
I think there could be some shootout appeal. We saw the matchup between the Rams and Lions last year in the playoffs where Stafford threw for 367 yards and a couple of scores. So I think there's some history there. As Pat mentioned, the Lions' pass defense should be a little bit improved, but I think their rush defense is still elite, which leads me to believe that the Rams are going to rely more on the passing game than the running game, especially we have questions about, Kyron Williams returning punts and all these other things. So I think Stafford's volume is going to get him there, and I think he's a pretty decent bet for, a 300-yard game if you're playing in a league that awards bonuses as well.
Pat, I want to go to you real quick, and this wasn't something that was on the sheet, but going through this, the top 12 is very chalk. This is a very chalk top 12, as it should be, by the way. Like, the one thing I think has always been frustrating, you guys have had this, for years, when you're starting, sit questions and answer, and then people are like, well, hey, I took, Josh Allen. Josh Allen's a bad example in this one, but I took CJ Stroud, but then I also took Matthew Stafford, and I really like Matthew Stafford's value. Should I start, and you start getting into that where like you're not even playing your invested high-end quarterback. So nothing wrong with it being chalk. But Pat, is there anybody outside of the top 12 that does pique your interest that didn't get there? A player that you think has a possibility to jump up. You just weren't comfortable with it because this is week 1. But was there somebody that was maybe giving you, no pun intended, some fits in your rankings?
Baker Mayfield is sort of intriguing, and he might be a guy who I would be looking to potentially start ahead of some higher drafted quarterbacks, just because I do not think a lot of the Washington pass defense. I think cornerback is going to continue to be a major Achilles heel for that team. And so it wouldn't surprise me if Baker, playing at home, put the Washington defense on a spit and roasted them in week 1.
Mick, same question for you. Was there anybody that was giving you a little bit of a problem you really wanted to push up a little bit more?
I was actually going to mention Mayfield as well, so I'm glad we're on the same page on that. If I had to pick a player outside of even Baker's range, I would say possibly Geno Smith. I think Denver is still going to be a below average defense, and Seattle should be upping the pace of their offense now with the new regime in place. So I would say Mayfield ahead of Geno, but Geno kind of intrigues me from a weekly standpoint.
If I understood it correctly, too, I believe the bold prediction show from yesterday, there might have been a Geno Smith nugget in there. So go and check that out on the YouTube and the podcast side. 10 bold predictions for the season. I was about to say, I'm not sure who had that Geno Smith nugget, but from that smile that Pat's got, I'm thinking maybe that came from you, Fitzy.
It was not me.
No.
It was Debro. Debro with a very bold and spicy Geno prediction.
It is very spicy. Go and check that out. All right. You want more on the quarterbacks? FantasyPros.com/rankings. You can check out the whole crew. Let's move to the running backs. It's running back rank time. We're going to be going through the top 36. We're going to give you the ECR, and then we are going to give you the important nuggets from it that both of these guys have in their ranks. So starting with the top 12 in ECR at running back using half PPR. Again, there's a pretty good element of chalk, as you would expect. Christian McCaffrey comes in at number 1. We've got Breece Hall at 2, Bijan Robinson at 3, Jonathan Taylor at 4, Saquon Barkley at 5. Again, chalk. There you go. Travis Etienne at 6, Jahmyr Gibbs at 7, Derrick Henry at 8, Kyron Williams, Devon Achane, Rachaad White, and Ken Walker coming in at number 12. The Ken Walker one, just to kind of throw out, it's very interesting. I want to be invested in the betting market. It's against a Denver Bronco team that decimated last year. I want to say it was like over almost 120 yards rushing per game on RBs. It makes sense why he's in here. We don't have it listed, but did either one of you guys, were you tempted or didn't put him inside the top 12? Mick, let's start with you. Did you not, or did you put Ken Walker inside the top 12?
I did. I actually have him as my RB7 this week because, the matchup is about as good as it gets. So, I think Walker's in for a big game on Sunday. Pat,
do you think there's any trap element to this with Ken Walker? Because he's the guy that stands out in the top 12 for drafters of, again, that the cute conversation of like, well, you draft your guy, blah, blah, blah. Ken Walker is one of the biggest risers just specifically for week 1 because of that Denver matchup. Did you kind of follow suit, or you think there's a trap in store?
Yeah, I mean, I do have him ranked right around that. I can't remember right now, Welsh, if I had him ranked RB12 or RB13. Don't have it in front of me, but no hesitation about starting him. And he's a guy I've been pushing a little bit all off season. No one's forced more missed tackles over the last 2 seasons at running back than Kenneth Walker. And, even if Denver, I know they have endeavored to fix their run defense, but it's still not going to be one of the better run defenses in the league. So this is a good matchup. It's at home. Everything like Vegas, I think Seattle's almost a touchdown favorite, maybe 6.5 in this game. Everything sort of points to a pretty big Kenneth Walker game here.
Going in and looking at the top 12, there was a back that you guys both have inside the top 12 who is outside of the top 12 in ECR, and that's Josh Jacobs. So, Mick, let's talk about Josh Jacobs, where he landed inside of your top 12 and why.
Sure. I have Jacobs as my RB11. I think more than anything, this is going to be a volume play. The matchup is not ideal against the Eagles, but I just think Jacobs is going to be the workhorse, especially early on in the season. We have Marshawn Lloyd, who's been in and out of practice with his injury issues. He's still questionable for this game. And then beneath him on the depth chart, you have Emmanuel Wilson, who's a 25-year-old with 23 career carries. So I just don't think that either of these guys is going to get a ton of run on Friday. I think it's going to be the Josh Jacobs show. And even in a pretty difficult matchup against the Eagles, if Jacobs gets 20 carries, I think that his floor is going to be high enough to push him into RB1 territory.
Fit, you've got him. We've actually got a couple others we're going to go to, too. Is there anything you wanted to add on the Josh Jacobs front?
Not really. I mean, I've sort of warned people all off season to maybe not expect a workhorse role for Josh Jacobs, given Matt LaFleur's history of using committees, backfield by committee. But this does set up for maybe workhorse usage for Jacobs. With Lloyd coming off the injury, I think he was limited in the last practice report. And, with Wilson probably not going to have a big role. So I think there's a pretty good bet we get at least 15 or 16 carries or touches for Josh Jacobs in this game.
We've got two other players and it's really interesting, the players that were pushed down in this respect. But James Cook was another one of those guys that was inside the top 12 that wasn't consensus fits. So talk to us about, the matchup, pretty tasty, Arizona Cardinals. Talk to us about, is it simply the matchup? Are you comfortable with the usage? I think there's Ray Davis in the back of some people's heads. What about James Cook getting into the top 12 for you?
Yeah, Bills home favorites by about a touchdown against the Cardinals. Pretty good setup. The Cardinals' run defense, not that great last year. And we really saw an uptick in James Cook's usage last year after Joe Brady was promoted to be the offensive coordinator for the Bills. So, I like Ray Davis. I think he's a really good prospect and will help take some of the load off the 190-pound Dalvin Cook. Sorry. Did I say Dalvin? James Cook.
See, you did it. I did the Stafford.
Exactly.
This is the all mess up team.
Man, still shaking off the offseason rust here, I guess. But so I feel pretty good about James Cook. I think he's going to get a lot of usage against the Cardinals, and it's a good matchup.
He was actually one of those guys where I was looking at, and I was like, how do I get you higher? There's always a couple of those, I think. There's in the top 15, I feel like there's one or two guys in any position, running back and wide receiver, where you're like, I need to keep going, but how do I do it? And James Cook was one of those players. The other one that showed up on this was Isaiah Pacheco. It's going to be Thursday. It's going to be a little bit sooner. But Mick, Isaiah Pacheco jumping over, I think, a few other pretty valuable running backs. What did you want to add on Pacheco?
Well, Pacheco is interesting. I actually have him higher from a season-long standpoint. I have him as my RB10. But I did drop him a little bit in this matchup. The matchup with Baltimore is going to be interesting because Baltimore is very good at limiting rushing touchdowns. However, they have ceded a pretty high yards per carry last season. I think they allowed the sixth highest yards per carry to opposing running backs. What I do like about Pacheco is his involvement in the passing game as the season went along. He had 19 receptions over the final 4 regular season games. So I think that raises his floor a little bit from a half PPR standpoint. So I think in this matchup, I think he's going to be a solid, back end RB1, high end RB2 in 12-team leagues.
I think the biggest question that surrounded that team and that running back situation is will Samaje Perine be a problem, and when could he be a problem? And if he's a problem, and a third question, it's probably in respect to the passing game. So this is one of those let me see week one. Let me see how this works. Let me see what they end up doing. Perine hasn't been around enough where they could justify not using him, but it could be the difference between Isaiah Pacheco being firmly inside the top 10 of RBs or just being a solid, RB12 or something like that all season. If he has the reception upside and that takes a jump, it's a big game changer. The other in the top RB12, talking about RB12 here, it's the core guys, but there's one massive difference that ended up popping here. And it's Derrick Henry. And this was alluded to a little bit here, Mick, earlier. Derrick Henry is actually up to ECR 8. Well, Fitz has got him at RB7, and you've got him at RB16. So let's start with the hate here for a second. Why are we down on Derrick Henry in week one, Mick?
Listen, if he scores a touchdown, I'm probably going to be wrong because obviously the volume is going to be relatively safe. I just don't know if he's going to get the touchdown. Kansas City allowed only 6 rushing touchdowns to opposing backs last year. And, the receiving upside is just not going to be there. Henry's averaged 19 receptions per game, per season over his career. He had a little bit of an uptick last year. We'll see if that translates again in a new offense this year. So I just don't know. I mean, it could be one of those games where he goes for 21 and 100, but doesn't score the touchdown and falls out of top 12 range. So, I mean, I think the yards will be there. I just think he's going to fall short of scoring the touchdown, which kind of drops him into RB2 territory for me.
Fitz, that's so fascinating because I feel the opposite. I feel like Derrick Henry is the touchdown of touchdown magnet and lock. I'm actually a little bit concerned about the usage because of Hill. They've been talking about Hill as like an RB1. I almost slam took early in the week the Derrick Henry rushing yard marker. Then I held back because it's like week 1. I don't know if they could have some splits. What I do know is if they're in a goal line inside the 5, Derrick Henry's getting the rock. And so I feel better about the touchdown than I do massive volume in week 1. So Fitz, break the tie between me and Mick here. You have him high. Where are you? Are you touchdown or volume? Or both, I suppose.
Both. So yeah, the DraftKings odds for an anytime touchdown by Derrick Henry -120. So better, they're expecting better than 50-50 odds he gets into the end zone. I tend to agree with that. Over under on his rushing yardage 63.5. I kind of like the over on that one too. Ravens fans might want to put on their earmuffs for the next 20 or 30 seconds, but I'm just going to remind people of that game where the Ravens bowed out of the playoffs to the Chiefs last year, where I think every Ravens fan I know was apoplectic that the Ravens did not run the ball nearly enough against a Chiefs defense that ranked 27th in DVOA versus the run last year. And yet the Ravens came out with this inexplicably pass-heavy approach in that game. I don't think they're going to make that same mistake. I think they are going to pound the rock with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, of course, too. So I think Henry's getting like 15, 16, maybe up to like 20 or more carries this game. Like, I know it's his debut, but what did you get this dude for? You did it to like pound the ball against, like, if you had any trepidation of like Gus Edwards getting major carries last year against the Chiefs, I don't think you've got that with Derrick Henry. I think they're going to feed him.
And when I make my bets for Thursday, like, I'm just not going to be able to hold back on Derrick Henry, even though I've been like a little trepidatious about it and like what that usage could be. It's a show pony. Like, they're going to show off. They got to show everybody their new toy to be a little kid. Like, look, I got Derrick Henry. Like, that's what we're going to see probably a lot of, and do like the touchdown call. So there was a big consensus difference. Let's move over into RB 13 to 24. ECR shows us we've got James Cook, Isaiah Pacheco, Josh Jacobs are 13 through 15, Joe Mixon at 16, Alvin Kamara, James Conner, Aaron Jones, David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert at 21, Ramondre Stevenson, 22, Najee Harris, and Javonte Williams rounds out the crew. We do have some ECR difference in here, by the way, and we're going to start with David Montgomery. David Montgomery comes in at ECR 20. Mick, you're the high guy on this room of him, but you have him at 19, a little above consensus, and Fitz down at 25. So we don't want to hold Mick down again, but let's go to the hater first. Pat, you are out on Dave Montgomery for all intents and purposes. You do not have him as an RB2 this week, where he is a consensus mid RB2. So what's got you out on David Montgomery? Is it a healthy Gibbs, or is it just offensive scheme that's going to end up going on with the Lions and the Rams?
It's Gibbs. Last year, early in the season, Montgomery averaged 22 carries over his first 4 games. They just pounded the ball with Montgomery. And they were somewhat sparing in their usage of then rookie Jahmyr Gibbs. But then Montgomery had this midseason rib injury, and he came back in week 10. And from that point on, in Detroit's last 9 regular season games and 3 playoff games, Montgomery averaged 13.7 carries and 1.3 catches a game. So about 15 touches. Didn't have more than 18 carries in any of those 12 games. I like Monty, but he is a committee back. Granted, a committee back in a good offense with a really, really good offensive line. But to me, RB25 seems about right for a committee back on a good team.
There's a slight argument, Mick, maybe you would make it, that, you know, early season, especially when you've got those 2-back system where you've got a guy that can absolutely pound the line of scrimmage and then a guy that you're going to spread out on the corners, you're going to throw the ball to, that early week, maybe even this game where you might want to slow it down, that you would want to just beat it between the tackles. that's, I think, where some of the argument for David Montgomery is this week. And regardless of what has been said about Jahmyr Gibbs being healthy, you can foresee week one with time that's been missed that they may want to halt back some of the usage. And I think that's where some of the trepidation comes from. But what say you, Mick? Because you are high-ish on David Montgomery. Is that what you're seeing? Do you think that we might see a little bit less Gibbs, or do you think this will just be one of those David Montgomery games where he's going to be an easy RB2?
I don't know about an easy RB2 because kind of, along the same lines as my Derrick Henry hate. If Montgomery doesn't score, he's going to have a hard time getting there. But I do think the volume is going to be pretty consistent. I think, Montgomery still has something left in the tank. He was Pro Football Focus's 12th ranked run grade last season. So I think that he's going to get a decent amount of volume early on in the year. Like you mentioned, Gibbs is definitely going to be a factor, but I think we might see him ease it in a bit more. I think we might see 15 to 18 carries out of Montgomery, which should put him in the RB2 conversation.
There's some inherent risk, I suppose, in there. This is another one of those guys where you've got a volume difference. Touchdowns are going to play a big key. He scored all the touchdowns last year. Raheem Mostert, who came in at RB21 on ECR, we've got a like and a dislike situation here. Pat, you've got him at 22. Mick, 27. So this is another one of those guys who did not make. So what is different for Raheem Mostert, Mick, that is not for David Montgomery? The touchdown leaders, because the same touchdown conversation, you can take the argument that Raheem Mostert should probably be right there if that's the only thing about David Montgomery. But we do know that Achane is there and probably going to take a next step. So what brought Raheem Mostert all the way down to 27 for you?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think, at least for me, I think it's more likely that he will see a reduction in early season volume than Montgomery. I think Achane is going to be a factor. They drafted Jalen Wright, and obviously they have, a potent offense. I think this is going to be more of a passing game. I mentioned Tua earlier. I think this is going to be more of a shootout and a passing game. So I think that's going to lend itself a little bit more towards Achane and his skill set. So I think Mostert's volume is going to be probably closer to the 10 to 12 carry range than 12 to 15. So that's what, made the tiebreaker for me and dropped him out of the top 24 for me.
Pat, you've got him inside. Do you foresee that we're going to see a much lower usage with Raheem Mostert? One of the things that was so great about him as a 49er fan that used to, watch him a bunch was when the 49ers would bring him in through a series, because guys is getting older, but great sprint speed. You could end up bringing him in on like the fourth drive of a series, and he could just go and dominate. And the Dolphins really have that ability to interchange with Achane and with Mostert, and they probably will continue to do it. I kind of, as much as I love Achane, it's been hard to talk myself off of the idea that they were going to give Mostert any less than 15 touches per game, which really ups the odds on the touchdowns. This is a potential shootout situation, which maybe ends it. But what do you think on Mostert, especially with like Mick having him outside? Like, what gets him there outside of a top 2 RB?
I'm with you, Welsh, and expecting sort of a status quo for the size of Mostert's workload. He averaged 13.9 carries a game last year. I think as long as he stays healthy, that's probably about what he's going to average this year. And we know he's going to be the goal line guy. I think that's why I have a 3-spot gap between Montgomery and Mostert, and would prefer Mostert. Maybe Montgomery's the goal line guy too, and he probably is at the 1-yard line. But it also wouldn't surprise me to see Gibbs in there on, at the 5-yard line or the 8-yard line. I think it's going to be Mostert inside the 10 for the Dolphins. This guy had 18 touchdown runs last year and had multiple touchdowns in 6 different games. And then just the fact that I do think this is going to be a high scoring game. Miami came out firing last year. They beat the Chargers 36-34 last year in the opener. 70 points put up in Miami's opener, and the other 15 games averaged 39.1 points a game in week 1. By the way, unders are a really good bet in week 1 if you're on the gambling side out there. So, I just feel good about the touchdown potential for Mostert right off the bat.
I was looking quite a few 48s this week, and I was like, ooh, might be some unders. So, I completely agree with you on that one. Real quick, as the last one that's not on the show sheet, I feel like there's one player in this RB2-ish range that has I don't know, taking a little tiny rocket boost as people are starting to like really facilitate like what they could be in this offense. And they're actually this back was given a 5-star rating on matchup this week. And it's Aaron Jones, who is at 19 on the list. And I know Debro is a big Aaron Jones guy. I've kind of a big Aaron Jones guy. The matchup is really there. Fitz, do you have any take on Aaron Jones? I don't know where you have him relative to this list. He seems kind of low at 19, but I feel like the sentiment is a lot more excited that maybe he's not like an RB1, but I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if when all the ranks are in for week 1, if Aaron Jones ended up pushing even into the top 15. Are you in or out on Aaron Jones for week?
In. I've got him ranked as a mid-range running back 2, item RB17 in my draft rankings. I had him ahead of Alvin Kamara, David Montgomery. I'm bullish. I'm a Packers fan, Welsh. Like, I've seen what this guy can do. If he's healthy, he's really, really good. And yeah, he stacked up 4 or 5 straight 100-yard games at the end of last season into the playoffs. Dallas Cowboys fans don't have to be reminded of how good Aaron Jones is because he steamrolled them in the playoffs last year. So yeah, and I think like they don't want Sam Darnold throwing 45 passes in week 1. So we're going to see a lot of Aaron Jones.
As long as if he did, 35 of them are to Justin Jefferson, but the other 10 might be to Aaron Jones. Mick, kind of same thing. Do you think Aaron Jones is kind of a hot commodity going into this week? Like the potential, if we do see him get 4, 5, 6 targets out of the backfield and he's the primary back, volume could be king even on a lesser of a Vikings team. Do you think he deserves a little bit more love going into week 1?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, I think when you were talking about James Cook, that there was certain running backs that you just wanted to keep bumping up, but at a certain point, you weren't sure how high you should go with them. That's kind of how I feel about Jones this week. I have him at 18, but I want to push him into the top 15. But, I have Henry and Achane lower than most analysts do, so I don't know if I want to put Jones ahead of those guys and bump those 2 even further. So it's sort of a mix and match kind of situation, but I do like Jones a lot in this matchup, and I think he's probably going to outperform expectations this week against the Giants.
Let's go to the RB 25 through 36 is kind of the flex RB range. We are looking at number 25, DeAndre Swift, Zamir White, Jerome Ford, Devin Singletary, Brian Robinson Jr., Tony Pollard, Chuba Hubbard, Zach Moss, Gus Edwards, Chase Brown, Austin Eckler, and Tajay Spears. Those are the guys that round out the top 36. And a couple of our notes in this range. Chuba Hubbard. Chuba has got an ECR of 31. This is a guy that we're going to pick on. Both of you guys are higher than the consensus. We've got Fitz, you at 29 and Mick at 25, almost an RB2 in here. So Mick, let's start with you real quick. You're very bullish on Chuba Hubbard, almost pushing the RB2 range. Talk to us about it.
I think we give Chuba the label of a scat back type running back, but he played 50% of snaps or more in 12 games last season. And when he did so, he averaged 11.21 fantasy points per game, which is squarely in that, top 20, top 25 range. I think he's going to get most of the work again this week. There's no Jonathan Brooks for the first few weeks of the season. So I think they're going to kind of rely on Hubbard. And I mean, the Carolina offense has nowhere to go for but up. So I think, any extra volume that Hubbard gets in this week and in the next few weeks before Brooks comes back, I think it's going to boost him into borderline, RB2 or at least flex territory.
Erickson and I talked about Chuba a lot, that he was just one of those kind of not free, but just one of those just great backs that was just wildly underrated in draft season because you're going to get a starter for multiple weeks and then you're going to get a guy that's going to be in usage pat. So you're a little bit higher on him. He's inside your top 30. Anything you want to add on Chuba?
No, I mean, I'm glad I'm above ECR at RB29 and feel like, maybe I should be closer to Mick at RB25. I think Mick's got it right in thinking like Chuba is probably going to operate as something close to a workhorse back. And we saw it in the preseason, like he played well ahead of Miles Sanders. I mean, I don't think the Panthers want to use Miles Sanders. It just like nothing has indicated they're interested in putting that guy in the field very much. So, like my only hesitation is that I don't know how much better, if at all, the Panthers offense is going to be. I'm optimistic that Dave Canales can fix things, but, it might be slow and steady progress. So maybe the touchdown upside with Chuba isn't quite as sexy as it might be for some higher ranked running backs.
This other one here really stands out. ECR 23 is actually not on this list, but there's kind of this balance why I wanted to talk about it real quick. Najee Harris, who ECR 23 could even move to that 25 range. Mick's got him at 29, and Fitz, you have him at 19. What a wide range that's in here. So, Mick, just real quick, you have him in the range that we're talking about here, quite a bit lower than consensus. It's a timeshare. Why is Najee so low for you?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. I think Atlanta has a very underrated run defense. They only allowed 5 rushing touchdowns and 3.8 yards per carry last season. And I think, like you mentioned, the committee with Jalen Warren, and I don't trust what this Pittsburgh offense is going to look like right off the bat. I mean, I don't know if Harris is getting 18 touches or 10. We got the new quarterback, new offensive coordinator, lots of moving parts. So I just kind of want to see it first before I kind of evaluate. I think this game's going to be interesting on both sides from that standpoint. You got new, coordinators and schemes offensively. So I think both offenses are a little bit up in the air as far as what we're going to see in week one. So I'm a little bit hesitant and, a little bit more reserved on those guys this week. I want to see it going forward.
Pat is not. Pat, you've got Najee Harris at 19 inside the top 20. So the complete inverse of what Mick said. Are you not concerned? Talk to us about Najee.
Oh, I wouldn't say I'm not concerned. I mean, when Arthur Smith is involved, there has to be some level of concern for certain. But we know that Jalen Warren has been dealing with a hamstring issue. Mike Tomlin says he's going to be available, but we don't know how much he's going to play. It's probably not anything close to a 50-50 in week one. And of course, Arthur Smith could really annoy us by giving Cordero Patterson a bunch of carries. And but I do think that we are probably going to see a healthy dose of Najee in this game. And I do think the Steelers are going to be pretty run heavy this year.
There's one situation in this I think is really odd. I just want to get your guys' take on it. You have both Cincinnati backs inside the top 36 or within a couple spots of each other. It feels very draft ranky, but you've got Zach Moss at 32, Chase Brown at 34 against New England. I know there's a much higher implied spread to the Bengals, I think, which works out there. But Pat, do you think this is just everybody not understand? Obviously, I don't think everybody fully understands. Zach Moss is one on the depth chart. Everybody wants it to be Chase Brown. Do you think this is a big hedge play, or do you truly think that both Zach Moss and Chase Brown can be flex options this week?
I think they can both be flex. Like I do think Chase Brown is the better long-term play, but I would expect something close to 50-50 in week one. And Moss might even be the better touchdown bet. I know in our Discord touchdown draft contest, I actually picked Zach Moss as my running back in week one, where it's sort of like a one and done pool where you cannot pick the same guy twice ever. Like I think Moss, especially in a game where the Bengals are big favorites, like I kind of like his touchdown odds this week.
Mick, same thing. Do you think they can both be flex options you're comfortable starting?
I think they can be, although to your point, it does feel a little bit, draft hedgy with both of these guys because, I'm not sure if they're both going to finish in that exact RB3 range. Maybe Moss is a little higher based on his touchdown upside. I think in a different matchup, where Cincinnati might be forced to throw the ball more, maybe you see more Brown. But I do think Moss and Brown are both going to be viable this week for sure.
Last thing on the running backs, your favorite outside the top 36 RB of the week. Pat, we'll start with you. Who's your favorite guy that didn't hit that flex option that you think could pop?
Jaleel McLaughlin of the Broncos. So much pass catching upside for the Denver running backs. They led the league with 153 running back targets last year. Sean Payton's offenses always funnel targets to running backs. And by the way, Bo Nix has always been a check down machine.
Mick, same thing. Your favorite outside the top 36 RB for the week?
I do like McLaughlin, but I'm going to go on the other side of that matchup and say Zach Charbonnet. I think, we talked about the Denver run defense. I think Walker is going to have a great game, but I think there's some room for Charbonnet as well. Denver not only was a sieve on the ground against running backs, but they allowed the 6th most receptions to running backs. That's an area where Charbonnet specializes. So I think, in an up-tempo matchup with Seattle's new offensive scheme, I think we could see Charbonnet get a few more touches in the red zone, especially.
All right, it's wide receiver rank time. But first, let's talk about DraftKings, because NFL Week 1 is here, and a new season means new ways to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Fans have spoken. We want to bet on touchdowns, and DraftKings heard us and is delivering. DraftKings Sportsbook is the #1 place to bet touchdowns. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like picking a player to score said touchdown. I actually looked. One of my favorites of the week, not trying to give away my touchdown call that Pat was talking about. He's got Zach Moss. Gus Edwards is like 2.5 to 1. I believe it was plus 260 on DK this week, and I quite like that. Ready to do a touchdown dance of your own? New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $250 in bonus bets instantly, plus 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get $250 in bonus bets when you bet just $5 and get 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. Offer ends 9/19 only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, fellas, let's talk about some wide receivers. We got the top 12. Here is the ECR consensus top 12 for week 1. Tyreek Hill comes in at number 1. Amon-Ra St. Brown at 2. Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown. Oh, Jamar Chase at 6. How things may change. Garrett Wilson at 7. Mike Evans, Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, and Jalen Waddle. The elephant in the room, my friends, is Jamar Chase. This is a very, if he plays, if he doesn't play, okay. I think the bigger question is at this point if he doesn't play. Pat, I mean, really just like figure this out for us. Like, what do we do here? Obviously, rankers are putting him in the assumption that he will play. If he doesn't, he's going to plummet. But what does it look like, let's say, if he signs on Friday? I think that everyone's kind of put the 48-hour marker on it. And I say that because, like, if he were to sign with 2 days to go, is he going to be full go? Is he going to be limited? What do you think the proper rank for Jamar Chase is right now?
If he signs, agrees to a new deal on Friday, I would probably have him ranked as a low-end wide receiver 1, like around wide receiver 10 or 11.
So he's still starting.
Yeah, I think no matter what, if he is playing, he is an unconditional starter, even though we might see the snaps scaled back. But on the bright side, the chemistry with Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow is pretty well established. They've been teammates in the NFL for several years. They played at LSU together. They know each other. Like, they know what to do if, it's a scramble drill and Joe Burrow has to, like, move out of the pocket. Like, he knows where Chase is going to be.
Jamar's not new to the playbook, is like what you're saying. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, I'm a little worried about a snap reduction, but man, if he is in, I'm playing him no matter what.
It's kind of a simplistic thing, even though we joke and I'm like, hey, elephant in the room is Jamar Chase. But Mick, it's like, if he might not play, you just take him off the list. If he I think if he signed, like, we're doing this on Wednesday. If he signed on Thursday, it feels even better. Friday's a little dicey to me, but I don't know if it's enough to not start him. So this really is a simplistic situation. And I guess I'm asking you, if he is signed in some capacity before Sunday and is suited, there's no scenario where you're not starting him. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not benching him. I'm going to start him. And, we can make the same argument about CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Aiyuk, some of these other guys who've recently signed. I think you have to start them. Are they going to be full bore right off the bat in week 1? Possibly not. So maybe some of those guys enter low, wide receiver 1 category territory. But I think ultimately you have to start those guys if they're playing. Yeah,
and maybe it's very, very simplistic. I just know there's going to be someone out there that's going to be like, man, Chase signed late Friday night, whatever. And then just like, can I really start da-da-da over da-da-da? You're going to put him out there in that comfortable spot. But just know that the most volatile is going to be him at this point, because when we get that word, or I'll tell you, the rank is going to look different on Friday if he hasn't signed. Rankers are just going to start plummeting him. But let's talk about a couple things inside the top 12. You guys have got one wide receiver in the top 12 that is not in the ECR. And then also you have thrown out an ECR top 12 wide receiver outside of at earliest wide receiver 14. So let's start with the guy that you guys bumped in. hello, Chris Olave, because Chris Olave did not make the top 12. Both of you have got him in there. So, Mick, let's start with you. Chris Olave, top 12 wide receiver for week 1. Talk to us why.
I think this is his wide receiver room now with Michael Thomas out of the fold. I think, we know Derek Carr's going to throw to Alvin Kamara 200 times probably, but when he's not throwing to Kamara, he's going to throw it to Chris Olave. Olave was finished 7th last season in yards per route run. He was also 7th in grade versus man coverage. So I think he's going to be, the number one option almost exclusively from a wide receiver standpoint. So I just think from a volume standpoint and a ceiling standpoint, I think Olave is going to be a high receiver this week.
And Mick has him at 12, but Fitz, you've got him at 10. So you're even a little bit more firm into it. Who got pushed down for Olave? Like, do you happen to even know? I guess I'm throwing this on you. I'm curious at who Olave jumped at that 11-12 range.
Yeah, I forgot who from the ECR in my top 12 has dropped one. I don't think I dropped anyone especially far. So they would still be a starter caliber guy for me. But I totally agree with Mick on Olave. His target share last year was 23.8%. And I would not be surprised if it was north of 25% this year, especially with the ambiguity they have at the other wide receiver spot, like Rashid Shaheed, sort of iffy status after missing a lot of time in recent weeks. But Olave is just far and away the best pass catcher on the Saints roster. And, maybe I'd be a little more concerned if I thought he was going to see shadow coverage from J.C. Horn, an excellent defender for the Panthers, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So no hesitation about Olave. I want him in my starting lineup.
Devontae Adams and Jalen Waddle were the ones. I went and looked. I pulled up Pat's rankings, which, hey, guess what? You could do the same over on Fantasy Pros, fantasypros.com/rankings. Check out the consensus, or you can get the experts specifically, and it's Devontae Adams and Jalen Waddle. So heavy in on Olave. You guys out on probably top 3 of the highest final 2-week risers. Cooper Kupp's rank. Everybody just kind of came together in those final 2 weeks and just said, what are we doing at wide receiver 20 or 19? And you started seeing him go inside the top 10 in some situations. He is ECR 11, but not for you guys. Mick has got him at 14 and Fitz 18. Where's the hate?
Not hugely bullish on the Rams passing game, as I mentioned before. A little concerned about the loss of starting left tackle Alaric Jackson, and I think Detroit is improved defensively. So I also I still feel better about Puka Nacua than I do about Cooper Kupp. Granted, Cooper Kupp is better in my week 1 rankings than he was in my draft rankings because health is a big concern, and he's healthy right now. I'm starting him pretty much unconditionally, but just not feeling great about him as a near wide receiver 1 for the first week.
See, I am. I think there's going to be an establishment of Cooper Kupp this week with all that's going on. But I will say Puka Nacua, I believe, has a top 5 quarterback, running back, wide receiver, cornerback PFF rating. So one of the best matchup ratings this week of anybody Puka Nacua has. But I also think with how they can interchange Kupp and Nacua, that can go to Cooper Kupp. So we'll see what ends up happening with it. But, some people have had Cooper Kupp over Puka Nacua. Mick, you're not in that situation. You're not quite as far down as Pat is, but any other take you want to throw on Cooper Kupp?
No, it's a similar mindset. Kupp was the guy I bumped for Olave as far as top 12 ECR ranks. I think I have Nacua 7th this week, and I think ECR is 9th. So I think it's going to be more of a Nacua game than Kupp. But to your point, wouldn't surprise me if that flipped. But either way, I think you're starting both guys comfortably. So yeah, I think Kupp's more of a wide receiver 2 this week, but I would still be starting him everywhere.
Well, let's go to a few more challenges and maybe where the ranks are going to be. Let's go to wide receiver 13 to 24. 13 starts off with Marvin Harrison. There is Olave here at 14. Drake London, Nico Collins, Michael Pittman, Deebo Samuel at 18, DJ Moore at 19, DK Metcalf, Amari Cooper, Malik Neighbors, Devonta Smith, and Brandon Aiyuk. I'm going to throw one real quick before we do it because, Pat, I want to get your take on this because I am much, much more with you here. Malik Neighbors came in at wide receiver 22. You've got him at 14. this week. And I think a lot of us, Malik Neighbors supporters and guys that have wanted to be invested in and on him is pure volume and what he's going to do. He's going to have volume for this team. Now, another positive could be is if the Vikings do get to the Giants early on, then this can turn into some weird version of a scoring fest of these offenses going back and forth. But just that there's a huge discrepancy between where the ECR is and where you are with Malik Neighbors. Maybe the most significant for your ranks versus ECR and the top two wide receivers. What's your take on Malik Neighbors for week one?
That he is going to be peppered with targets as he will continue to be all season. Like, I think Brian Daboll is fully ready to make Malik Neighbors the centerpiece of this offense. And the Vikings do not have a great set of cornerbacks. I think that's kind of a vulnerability in their defense. I'm ready to see Malik Neighbors eat right away.
I am too. I looked at the yards. By the way, one of my bets for this week, he is under, his actual yard total is under what the projections are looking like right now. So there's about a 5-yard cushion between where projections have Neighbors right now. And he's plus money on 5.5 receptions over. So, Vegas isn't seeing anything less than 5 receptions, but that's where we all just don't quite know. Mick, I don't know where you have Neighbors. Do you have him beating ECR or below?
I actually have him at 20, so I'm pretty much in range with ECR. I'm actually higher on him this week than I have him in my draft rankings, and I think my ranking of Neighbors in general is more of a Daniel Jones ranking than it is a Malik Neighbors ranking, because we know Neighbors is supremely talented, and yes, he should be the first read more often than not with the Giants. I just don't trust Danny Dimes. He's been in the NFL for 5 seasons, and the Giants have not even had an 800-yard receiver in any of those 5 seasons. I do expect that to change this season with Neighbors, but I just don't know if the ceiling is going to be, as high as some of these other guys in like the top 15 or so wide receivers.
All right, well, let's jump to some discrepancies in here. You guys are both lower than this wide receiver that is on the consensus, and it is Nico Collins, who has got the ECR of, it's actually now 16. It was 14 when we originally did this. Mick, you've got him at 18. Fitz, you've got him down at 21. Mick, let's actually go to you. You are the higher guy. You're actually closer. You guys both think insightful to where ECR is trending, that you guys have got him in this area. Though he has a great cornerback wide receiver matchup, but all 3 of these guys are out here. And I do think everyone is trying to come to terms with which wide receiver with the Texans am I going to have suffer for this week. One guy has to go. One guy has to be the one that is not going to jump. Personally, by the way, I really think this could be a Tank Dell week 1. I'm going to probably have him higher than most. But Mick, you're a little bit higher, just under consensus, so you're higher than Fitz. Talk to us about Nico Collins.
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, it's going to be interesting from week to week and matchup to matchup how the targets are going to be divvied up between these receivers. So I think, almost one is certain to disappoint in any matchup, and it'll be just a matter of which one that'll be. I think Collins will be fine this week. As you mentioned, he's got a very good individual matchup. So I think he is the safest among the Texans wide receivers. So that's why I project him in the top 20.
Pat, this rank isn't indicative of failure because you still have him as a wide receiver too. But do you have this in that you think we're going to see more of a spread? I'm curious at what this week 1 rank is versus where you had Nico in draft season, because what has changed? Because if just going with this, if Nico was let's say a top 15 guy for somebody, I'm not saying you, it's an arbitrary person. And then week 1, he's outside the top 20, yet he has a great matchup. It almost doesn't seem to jive with how people maybe were ranking, and obviously they have to suffer. So again, your rank isn't indicative that you necessarily, or at least projecting that he's going to fail, but what is your thought process on having him lower with this group, and maybe even tying it into how you pre-draft ranked him?
So I'm being pretty consistent on this. Nico's ADP has just confounded me all offseason. I just don't understand why people were drafting him as a high-end wide receiver too with this much target ambiguity. I mean, Stephon Diggs averaged like an insane amount of targets for the Bills the last 4 years. Like he was one of the true alpha receivers in the NFL over that period. And, as Mick was just saying, like Houston's target distribution week to week is going to be this moving target. And I don't want to put anyone in my top 20 for weekly rankings if I can't be reasonably sure they're going to get more than 6 targets. And I don't know that. Not like I love the player. I hate fading Nico Collins because I love how he is just so good in contested catch situations and this George Kittle-like bully when he has the ball in his hands, like really hard to tackle. But just unless Stephon Diggs or Tank Dell misses considerable playing time, I have a hard time seeing how Nico finishes as a high-end wide receiver too.
That was really well said. That was, I think it was a really good way to put it, because I think that is a tricky one. There's a couple of those that are super tricky. And, like it's similar to that Bengals running back situation where it's like we're putting Brown and Moss in there. Like all these wide receivers are top 36, but how do we come to terms with one being dramatically higher? And I think that I kind of agree with you. I guess I'm saying with the draft season, how can Nico be so much more valuable than the others? But I suppose the season's going to also tell us, like maybe Diggs just becomes a complete secondary piece and we were all underrating Tank Dell, or, Nico goes back to being the guy. It's a tough one. I just think it'd be interesting. You're probably, I guess, not the person to do it. It'd be interesting to have the person that ranked him, 14 or something, and then would rank him outside the top 20 this week and what brought us there. The other guy in the wide receiver 2 range, I think this is a super tricky one. Seems like you guys have both come to terms with it, is Brandon Aiyuk. Brandon Aiyuk, wide receiver 24 this week. I think that ECR is built around, obviously, he had not played. He had not been practicing. Probably going to be on some version of a snap count. You guys both took it a step further and put him in at wide receiver 28. So Mick, did I just kind of answer it? Do you feel that Brandon Aiyuk is going to be put in kind of a timeshare, but limited snaps due to no usage in the preseason?
I think that's going to be a factor. He may not be at 100% snap rate or as much as normal would be under normal circumstances. But I think in addition to a potential decrease in workload, I think it's the matchup. The New York Jets have the best pass defense in the NFL. They have, everybody talks about Sauce Gardner, but the Jets have 3 cornerbacks who place in the top 15 according to Pro Football Focus. You have DJ Reed and you have Michael Carter in the slot. So I think no matter where Aiyuk matches up, he's going to have a difficult matchup. Could he get there? He could have 3 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown and get there. But I think, the volume is not going to be there in this matchup. So that's why I have him lower than normal.
Yeah, it's funny. That was where I was going to turn it to you, Pat, was outside of that, you have the matchups. I think a lot of people were trying to put like Sauce on Debo. I think you're probably going to have Gardner locking down Aiyuk in a lot of situations. The 49ers like to move Debo a lot. You're going to get screen passes. They're going to just move him around. They're going to have end-around situations to get him more open. I personally, again, as a Niner fan, feel this is a Debo Kittle game where you're going to see a lot of usage on them. So I'm in agreement. Anything else you want to add as far as the holdout affecting or the matchup affecting?
Yeah, all those things are concerns for a guy who only averaged 6.6 targets a game last year to begin with and had this great season because he was so ruthlessly efficient all year. And I don't think he's going to be all that efficient against a defense this good. So yeah, like I have him at wide receiver 28. I'm worried that's too high, not too low.
Okay. Let's go over to the final set here. These are our wide receiver 3s. Some leagues, these are going to be flexes. This is wide receiver 25 through 36. We've got Rashee Rice, George Pickens, Stephon Diggs, Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, Zay Flowers coming in at 30, Chris Godwin, Tank Dell, Christian Kirk, Deontay Johnson, Calvin Ridley, and Keenan Allen. Yes, that is 3 Houston Texans wide receivers inside the top 36. A couple things to pick out here. We got a debate between you guys. T. Higgins is ECR 29. Fitz said, yep, I'll do the exact same. I will get him at ECR. Mick, you said no. I'm going to have him inside the top 2 wide receivers at 22. So let's get your take on the high rank of T. Higgins.
I think in some respects, it's a little bit of a Jamar Chase hedge. We were discussing him earlier. I think if Chase signs, Thursday or Friday, maybe I bump Higgins down closer to 25. But I think he's going to be the number 1 target for Burrow this week. And I'm not worried about the matchup with the Patriots. So I think, based on the volume that I think he's going to get, I have him as a wide receiver 2 this week.
Okay, that was essentially kind of where I was going to go with this, by the way, was like, I think it's a no-brainer, Fitz. If Jamar Chase isn't there, T. Higgins is going to go up, I imagine. Maybe you can even tell us where you'll put him if we get that official word. But with Jamar Chase in there, you're right at ECR. Where do you think he goes if Chase is out?
I think if Chase is out, he probably moves to the cusp of the top 20, right around there, probably where Mick is, maybe even a little higher than that. Like, I need to move T. Higgins up. It's inevitable I do, and I think you're just starting him in fantasy regardless. Like, even if you broke in with breaking news right now, Welsh, that Jamar Chase had come to an agreement with the Cincinnati Bengals, I think I would still start T. Higgins pretty much unconditionally in fantasy.
Okay, how about this? Your gut right now, Chase signs. I know you have Aiyuk one spot higher, but would you go Higgins or Aiyuk week 1?
I would move up Higgins ahead of Aiyuk.
That's what I felt. Yeah, that's what I felt you were leading to. Like, you
I need to do that anyway. It's
probably the play. That is probably the play to go. Another one, this is a little wide receiver fringy too, but you'll follow me with why I want to do it. This wide receiver did have an ECR of 19, who we just talked about, DJ Moore. Fitz has him at 17. You're a little bit higher. The reason I'm bringing this in is because, Mick, you've got him as a wide receiver 3 at wide receiver 25, DJ Moore. So he is in this territory of maybe doesn't start. I mean, you have him as a not start in wide receiver 2. Maybe he's a flex spot option. Where is the concern with DJ Moore for week 1?
Yeah, I think ultimately he will end up in the flex range, but I think my concern with Moore is sort of the opposite situation with Chris Olave. So last season, Moore had a 28.5% target share. I think that's going to dip a little bit with some more options in the fold, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze. So even though with the quarterback upgrade in Caleb Williams, I think that the volume might be a little less for DJ Moore than it was in previous seasons in Chicago.
Only player I want to bring up real quick in this, and then we're going to just jump out to a couple outside the 36 things, is does anybody feel that Terry McLaurin might be underranked this week? And I would specifically say you got Jaden Daniels at ECR 10 right now. I mean, Mick, I think you were kind of out on Jaden Daniels, so maybe not. But a 4-star, as far as rating goes, it's one of the better ratings in this general range. He's ECR 28. Tampa, there's something that jumps out to me when I look at this. The number one that I'm like, oh, is maybe Terry McLaurin, Pat. I don't know how you feel about that. This is another one of those where it's like, I want to get him higher, but I can't. Do you think there's a little displacement of where ECR with McLaurin is, or do you think this is a matchup-based thing and a rookie quarterback in week 1?
So I'm a little higher than consensus. I've got him wide receiver 26. I understand that maybe there's some concern about Jaden Daniels, and like, this is, after all, his NFL debut, and he's doing it like in hostile territory. Like, he's on the road for his first start of his career, and maybe it doesn't go totally swimmingly. But I mean, like, yeah, McLaurin is going to be the clear alpha receiver for the Commanders, and I do have good feelings about Jaden Daniels. So, like, I'd start McLaurin without hesitation.
Mick, you're not comfortable with Jaden Daniels. Did that also spill down to Terry McLaurin for you?
A little bit, but, like Fitz said, I think, it might be a little bit too low on McLaurin because, as he mentioned, he is going to be the alpha in that offense. He mentioned that maybe we have Brandon Aiyuk too high. I think, come Sunday, maybe I might bump McLaurin ahead of Aiyuk. So, yeah, that's something I'm a little bit fluid on, but I think McLaurin's going to be a wide receiver 3 regardless.
Like we did with running backs here, outside the top 36, and Mick, maybe we can start with you. I'd like to get your take on a wide receiver that didn't make the top 36 that you think could be a player that could jump into there. You're maybe invested in to get into flex. Maybe your favorite wide receiver outside the top 36, or a guy that really has your attention. Mick, we'll start with you.
I think I'd probably go with Courtland Sutton. Fitz mentioned that Bo Nix likes to dump the ball off, but I think, Sutton is going to be the top target on that offense. He had double-digit touchdowns last season. On the road at Seattle, they're going to have to probably play from behind. So I think Sutton is a pretty safe bet for floor, and he has the touchdown upside that we're looking for as well.
Pat, you had a little smirk like maybe he took your guy. I don't know if that was going to be your guy, but
yeah, I mean, that actually was one of my guys, and probably would have been my choice if Mick hadn't mentioned him. But I'll go deep here. Brandon Cooks And I know the matchup against the Browns isn't that great. The Browns have like a really good collection of cornerbacks, but Cooks was very quietly from, I think, week 10 on last season, the wide receiver 14 in half-point PPR scoring. Like, it took him a while to get on the same page with Dak Prescott, but once they did, like, Cooks was pretty much the same Brandon Cooks we're used to, who just goes from team to team and puts up 1,000-yard seasons wherever he goes. So, like, I also think Dallas is going to be pass-heavy this year, because when you've got Zeke Elliott, Rico Dowdle, and Dalvin Cook as your running backs, why wouldn't you be pass-heavy?
It's a very good point. Before we get to tight end ranks, let me tell you guys about Locker Bet. All right, guys, have you ever felt like you could call the plays better than the coaches on the field? Well, now you can, and you can prove it with Locker, the new innovative fantasy app where you predict the plays as they happen in real time. Talking about making real-time decisions during the games, like predicting which player will rack up the most yards on the next drive. And guess what? We've got our very own Fantasy Pros Locker League, where you can join in the action, compete against the Fantasy Pros team, and take home some serious cash. There are unlimited and uncapped prize pools, so the sky's the limit. Just make the calls and watch the points roll in. Plus, with rolling entry options, you can jump in at any time. Sign up today with the link in the description and use promo code FANTASY. Then join the Fantasy Pros Locker League to show us your play calling skills. Whether you're a fantasy pro or a rookie, this is your chance to win big, because Locker isn't just fantasy, it's live gameplay at its finest. All right, tight end ranks, the final one here, the top 12. We've got Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, and Trey McBride falling down to 5 in the ranks this week, but those are the chalk names. Evan Ingram, Kyle Pitts, George Kittle, David Njoku, Jake Ferguson, Dallas Goedert, and Brock Bowers. I guess the question I'm just going to throw at you, not that it really truly matters, but Pat, McBride, do you think he's like barely a top 5 tight end with the matchup against Buffalo this week? Again, no one's not starting him, but just seeing, Andrews and Kincaid above him and him being pushed down to 5 just kind of jumped out to me.
I feel like if this game were being played in Arizona rather than Buffalo, we might see McBride ahead of Kincaid. It's probably that close for people. Like, I know that I've flip-flopped those guys in my rankings a couple times in the offseason. It's just a pretty that tier of the tight end group is pretty flat to me. So like with Andrews, Kincaid, McBride, even Kittle and Pitts, maybe. Like, I just don't think there's a lot of separation there.
And it is weird. The tight end rankings this week, it's just kind of all of the big chalky names, though we will try to get a sleeper outside of the top 12. I do want to talk about this guy. And Mick, I like to see it because Fitz is higher, so we'll go back to Fitz in a second. But you both have Brock Bowers inside the top 12. He is ECR 12, which is kind of good to see. I know Pat and Bogman are the world's highest on Brock Bowers for this year, but it's a little dicey on what the early weeks are going to do. Mick, you have seemed to be a little bit conservative in some of the rank stuff we've talked about, which is very understandable, but Bowers getting inside the top 12, I don't know, maybe you could call that conservative or not. I just think there's questions around it. What made you comfortable enough to get him as a top 12 tight end?
I just think he's supremely talented and is going to get a ton of opportunities in that offense. I have a slight issue with the foot injury. There's a little bit of concern there, but I think he's going to be full go. And I just think, a lot of the tight ends in this range are sort of interchangeable and, between 10 and 15. So I'm going to go with the upside with Bowers princesses. Fitz,
you're all in. You've got Bowers at 10. Might be the lowest you rank Bowers all season long. I think that's a very fair thing to potentially say. What do you want to add to it? I do think of all the tight ends that are on this list, everybody's got these guys. Bowers is the one I think people could start second guessing because just nobody really has a great feel of what this week 1 is going to look like, where this could be the number 1 tight end because no one's going to ask like, hey, should I not start Trey McBride? People might legit say, hey, should I just go with Conklin, in that linebacker core with the 49ers trying to cover him and where the Jets are going to go? Should I go Conklin over Bowers for week 1 and play it safe? You say no. So talk to us about maybe what you're comfortable with Bowers.
I think he's special. I think he's maybe the best tight end prospect to ever come into the NFL. And I want to be above consensus. I know people didn't love the landing spots. I was less worried about the quarterback because Gardner Minshew, like he had like Michael Pittman had a great season with Minshew last year, well over 100 receptions. And even though the Colts had this confusing jumble at tight end last year, Colts tight ends still combined for like 70 catches and 800 plus receiving yards. My bigger concern was maybe how Luke Getsy would use him, because like Bowers can be this great chess piece. He can line up in line, out wide, in the slot, in the backfield. And like, is Luke Getsy the kind of offensive mind to use this Swiss Army knife in the best possible way? In Brock Bowers' one preseason game, Getsy lined him up all over the place. And that was exactly what I was excited to see. And oh, by the way, like Bears fans are probably still having like nightmare flashbacks to how much Luke Getsy loved the screen pass. That might not be the worst thing in the world if you are a Brock Bowers investor, because I could see a lot of tight end screens coming this year. I'm just super excited. Can't wait to see what it looks like. And I think Bowers is going to, like, it wouldn't shock me if he wound up a top 3 tight end this year.
Well, one guy that's not going to jump in there, this is outside the top 12, a difference that you guys have got on ECR, whatever differences we can really have on tight ends right now, is ECR 17 currently is Cole Kmet, where you both have pushed him out of the top 20. So that's not going to be a guy if someone's like, hey, I don't want to play the upside of Bowers, I just want to play it safe. Doesn't look like that's going to be one of those guys for you. Mick, let's start with you. You've got him at tight end 21 versus 17 this week. So, like premium tight end leagues and stuff like that, or deeper leagues, Kmet is definitely an option. He is not for you, though. What do you want to throw on the Cole Kmet shade?
I think it's sort of what I mentioned with DJ Moore. I just think there's more diverse, options as far as the passing game goes with Chicago. So I think the volume might not be quite as high from a target share perspective as it was last season. And I don't love the matchup against Tennessee. The Titans only allowed 3 receiving touchdowns by tight ends last season. So if Kmet doesn't get in the end zone, I just think he's going to fall short of where you'd want to start him, even in tight end premium leagues.
Fitz, what do you got on Kmet? You're even lower. I think you're at 22.
Yeah, Mick mentioned the tough matchup. That is one strike against Kmet, who really good young tight end, a different situation. Like I might have had him in my top 12 in my draft rankings, but blinking warning lights with his usage in the preseason. Whenever the Bears had their starters on the field, they were rotating Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett, the newcomer at tight end. So like this is going to be a value killing tight end platoon. Oh, and by the way, the Bears have a really good group of receivers too, which is probably going to hurt the tight end target share. Kmet's just a stay away, I think, until further notice.
Also, like tight ends can play safety nets, especially for rookies. But like when you have a slot receiver like Keenan Allen, like he's not a tight end, but it's like it's a pseudo version of the player that's going to play low inside, right on the outside. Like that's where Keenan Allen's going to be. He is the version of the high end rookie tight end.
Yeah, Welsh, I'll predict that we see Cole Kmet as like one of the most dropped players in the first couple of weeks of the fantasy season.
I wouldn't be surprised about that. Well, let's get a player that we're not dropping. How about a sleeper tight end for the week? Pat, let's start with you. Outside the top 12 sleeper tight end, but a guy that you think could push up here, someone that you would keep an eye on, maybe start if things get tricky.
Let's make it a sleeper quarterback / tight end. Taysom Hill. Carolina's run defense was dead last in DVOA last year, and the Saints have all but screamed to us that Taysom Hill is going to have a prominent role this year. He's streaky, but he was a top 10 fantasy tight end last year, just barely sneaking into the top 10. So there's certainly upside here. He had some big games last year. Wouldn't be surprised if he had one in week 1.
Taysom Hill in the touchdown contest might be kind of fun too. Have to see what those odds are over on DraftKings. Mick, same thing. Your sleeper tight end that's outside the top 12, someone you'd be taking a look at.
I'm going to go with Colby Parkinson. I think, as I mentioned earlier with the Rams, I think they're going to throw the ball a lot against Detroit. And obviously, Kupp and Nakua are going to be the top 2 options in the passing game. But I think, Parkinson can sneak in for possibly a score against this Lions defense.
Well, friends, tough decisions are out there with lots of ranks. We've got you covered on all of the shows, so make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube and the podcast side where we're answering your questions, whether it's live streams or on demand. FantasyPros.com/rankings where you can check it out. But also, the number one tool to help you is My Playbook. So make sure you guys go and check out My Playbook today. You can download the My Playbook app and make all of your decisions easier. It's like having Pat Fitzmaurice on your phone at any time. Waiver assistant, trade analyzer, multi-league worker. You can have all of your leagues and your roster stuff done on My Playbook. Trade questions, analyze it. Who's the best waiver? Bam. Like I said, it's like having the Fantasy Pros team with you. So go and download the in-season app for My Playbook. It's going to help your in-season stuff. We did everything for the draft season. So don't just stop it after the draft because your league doesn't stop. That's how Fantasy Pros is as well. So go and check out My Playbook and download the app today. Fellas, we did it. Week 1 is in the book. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. Those are the ECR and our takes. Mick, you're fantastic. Thank you so much. You can catch Mick on all the rankings, and he'll be on more shows with us. Pat, the king of Fantasy Pros, our favorite person. Can't do enough shows with Pat. Love being able to do a show with you this year, and hopefully you guys can tolerate me. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We got a whole bunch more for you. Make sure you're subscribed. Good opportunities to win. For Mick and Pat, I'm Welsh, and we'll talk to you next time right here on Fantasy Pros, the football podcast. Bye, friends.